It was an ordinary evening at one of the most exclusive establishments in the city, a place where status and wealth determined whether you belonged. The Velvet Lounge wasn't just a bar, it was a statement, a sanctuary for the elite, a world where designer suits, expensive watches, and rare spirits ruled. Hidden behind carved mahogany doors, this was where the wealthy gathered, basking in their exclusivity. The lounge's regulars consisted of high-profile executives, socialites, and politicians, all reveling in the knowledge that not just anyone could step into their world. The staff, carefully selected for their ability to cater to this clientele, took pride in maintaining the lounge's exclusivity. Among them was Victor, the head bartender, known for his keen ability to recognize who belonged and who didn't. Then there was Elena, always draped in luxury, a woman who thrived on prestige and appearances. Max, the doorman, was a former boxer turned gatekeeper of this elite sanctuary, deciding who deserved entry. That night, the Velvet Lounge was buzzing as usual. Glasses clinked, hushed conversations hummed, and laughter rippled through the dimly lit space. Everything was as it should be, until he walked in. He didn't fit the scene. His worn leather jacket and slightly faded jeans contrasted sharply with the tailored suit surrounding him. He moved with an easy confidence, his hands in his pockets, his expression calm. But to the staff and patrons of the lounge, he was invisible, a nobody. Max intercepted him immediately, his imposing stance blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" His tone made it clear. This was not a welcoming offer. The man smiled slightly, undeterred. "Yeah, just here for a drink." Max hesitated, scanning the stranger. He wasn't used to people like this strolling in so casually. Before he could say more, the man had already made his way past him and toward the bar. Victor, polishing a glass, raised an eyebrow as the stranger settled onto a stool. He had seen this before. Someone trying to play a role they couldn't afford. Elena, seated nearby, let out a quiet scoff, glancing at Victor. "Who let him in?" she muttered. Victor smirked but remained professional. He approached the stranger. "What can I get you?" The man glanced at the collection of bottles behind the bar, his eyes pausing on one in particular. "What's the most expensive drink you've got?" Victor barely suppressed a chuckle. "That would be our Louis XIII Black Pearl Cognac, $20,000 a bottle." The stranger nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds interesting. I'll take a glass." A beat of silence. Then Victor leaned forward slightly. "Sir, we require payment up front for high-end selections." The murmur in the lounge faded as more eyes turned toward the bar. People were now watching, amusement flickering across their faces. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, placing it on the counter. Victor barely glanced at it before shaking his head dismissively. "Sorry," he said smoothly. "We don't accept just any card." The insult hung in the air. The man's expression didn't change. He simply sighed, picked up his card, and stood. "All right then," he said, his tone calm before walking toward the door. As the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him, Elena exhaled a small laugh, twirling the stem of her glass between her fingers. Did he really think he could just stroll in here? Victor chuckled. "Happens all the time. Some people just don't know their place." Max grunted in agreement, probably just looking for attention. They all returned to their conversations, the moment fading from their minds. What they didn't know was that they had just made a mistake they would never forget, because the man they had just dismissed as a nobody wasn't just anyone. He was Keanu Reeves, and he wasn't done with the Velvet Lounge yet. The cold night air brushed against Keanu's face as he stepped outside, but he barely noticed. He had been turned away from places before. His unassuming style often led to people underestimating him. Normally, he let it go. He wasn't the type to flaunt his wealth or demand recognition. But tonight was different. It wasn't just about being refused service. It was the way they had dismissed him, the arrogance in their eyes, the way they had laughed. It reminded him of the world he had fought so hard to escape, the one that judged people not by their character, but by their appearance. He took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. "Keanu," came a familiar voice on the other end. "Didn't expect a call from you tonight." "Hey, Michael," Keanu said, his voice even. "You still own the Velvet Lounge?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Yeah." Why? Thinking of stopping by? Keanu smirked to himself. Already did. Another pause, then a knowing sigh. Ah, and I take it the staff didn't exactly roll out the red carpet? You could say that, Keanu said. I think I'd like to pay another visit. But this time, I'll need your help. Michael didn't hesitate. He and Keanu had been friends for years, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that Keanu never did anything without a reason. I'll make the arrangements, Michael said. Keanu ended the call and hailed a cab. Tonight was about to get interesting. Back inside the Velvet Lounge, the evening carried on as usual. Victor continued mixing drinks, his earlier amusement fading into routine. Elena basked in the attention of the elite, while Max stood at his post, ensuring that only the right kind of people entered. None of them gave another thought to the man they had turned away. Then just after midnight, the doors swung open again. This time it wasn't just anyone who entered, it was Michael Carter, the owner of the Velvet Lounge himself. The atmosphere in the lounge shifted instantly. People recognized him immediately. A tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s, Michael exuded authority. He rarely visited unannounced, and when he did, it was never without a reason. Victor straightened instinctively behind the bar. Elena leaned in slightly, her curiosity piqued. Max, noticing his boss's arrival, tensed at the entrance. Michael's gaze scanned the room before he strode directly to the bar. Victor, he said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Victor nodded quickly, stepping away from his station. Of course, sir. Michael led him to a quieter corner, lowering his voice. I heard you turned someone away tonight. Victor frowned slightly. Yeah, some guy who didn't seem like he belonged here. He walked in dressed like he'd just come from a motorcycle shop and asked for our most expensive drink. We were just doing our job. Michael studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward Victor. On the screen was a photo of Keanu Reeves. Victor's face drained of color. That's the man you turned away, Michael said, his tone unreadable. You just kicked out one of the most famous actors in the world. Elena, who had been listening from a distance, walked over. What's going on? She asked. Michael turned the phone toward her. Elena's expression shifted instantly. Wait, that was Keanu Reeves. Michael nodded. And from what I heard, you laughed at him as he left. Elena's stomach twisted. She had barely given him a second glance, brushing him off like he was beneath her. Victor swallowed hard. Michael, listen. Michael held up a hand, cutting him off. I'm not here to listen to excuses. I'm here to fix your mistake. Victor exchanged a nervous glance with Elena. How do we do that? Michael smirked. Well, let's just say Keanu is coming back. Victor's heart pounded. Keanu Reeves was coming back, and this time, they wouldn't see it coming. Meanwhile, outside the lounge, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out first, opening the back door. And from the vehicle emerged a man who, just hours ago, had been dismissed as a nobody. Keanu Reeves. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two men in tailored suits stepped out behind him. One of them his personal assistant, the other a high-profile entertainment lawyer. Their presence alone radiated authority. Max, still stationed at the entrance, tensed. Something wasn't right. Keanu approached with his usual easygoing demeanor, but there was a quiet power in his stride. He wasn't just some guy in a worn leather jacket anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. Max hesitated. Sir, Before he could finish, Michael's voice rang out from behind him. Let him in. Max turned, startled. Michael had never interfered with his job before, but there was no arguing with that tone. With a stiff nod, Max stepped aside. And just like that, Keanu Reeves walked back into the Velvet Lounge. The room fell into an uneasy silence as heads turned, eyes widening in shock. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena's face went white. Victor stood frozen behind the bar. They had made a terrible mistake. Keanu's gaze swept across the room, his expression unreadable. Then finally he smiled, just slightly. Well, he said, his voice calm, this is a nice place. Nobody knew what was about to happen next, but they all knew one thing. This night was far from over. The atmosphere inside the Velvet Lounge had shifted dramatically. The usual air of exclusivity, of effortless luxury was now laced with tension. Conversations had quieted to whispers. Drinks were left half-finished as eyes discreetly flicked toward the man at the center of it all, Keanu Reeves. Elena's grip on her cocktail glass tightened, her knuckles turning white. Victor, usually confident behind the bar, found himself standing unusually still, his mind racing. Max, the gatekeeper of the lounge, hovered near the entrance, his shoulders stiff. Michael Carter, the owner of the establishment, stood beside Keanu, watching his staff with a knowing look. "Welcome back," Michael said smoothly. "Please, let me get you a table." Keanu tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't want to take someone else's seat," he said. "After all, this place is very exclusive, isn't it?" Elena winced. She didn't need him to spell it out. She could hear the weight behind his words. Michael forced a chuckle, trying to ease the moment. "You're always welcome here, Keanu." Keanu nodded, his gaze sweeping the lavish decor, the polished marble floors, the expensive bottles behind the bar. He had been in places like this before, places that thrived on wealth and status, that dictated a person's worth by the price tag on their suit. He turned back to Michael. "Actually," he said, "I'd like to sit at the bar." Elena's stomach twisted. Michael hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Of course." Keanu walked over and took a seat directly in front of Victor. The bartender, still rattled, cleared his throat and forced a polite smile. "Welcome back," Victor said, his voice quieter than usual. "What can I get you?" Keanu tapped the counter lightly. "How about that $20,000 drink I asked for earlier?" A ripple of unease moved through the room. Victor swallowed hard. "Of course. Right away." He turned to retrieve the bottle, but his hands trembled slightly as he poured the rare cognac into a crystal glass. He had served millionaires before, billionaires even, but this was different. This wasn't just about serving a drink. This was a reckoning. Elena, sensing the weight of the moment, cautiously approached. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice softer than before. I just want to say that we're really sorry about earlier. It was a misunderstanding." Keanu raised an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. "A misunderstanding?" Elena forced a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I mean, we didn't realize who you were." Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "So if I wasn't famous, it would have been okay to treat me like that?" The words hit harder than she expected. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, of course not," she stammered. "It's just, we have to be careful about who we let in. You understand, right?" Keanu let the silence stretch between them, letting her feel the weight of what she had just said. "No," he finally said. "I don't." Elena's face burned with shame. She turned to Victor, silently pleading for backup, but the bartender was too focused on carefully placing the glass in front of Keanu. Keanu picked up the drink, swirled it slightly, then examined the rich amber liquid inside. For a moment, it looked like he might take a sip. Then, without hesitation, he slid the glass across the bar. Directly to Victor. The bartender blinked in shock. "What?" Keanu smiled slightly. "That drink is for you." Victor hesitated, his hands hovering over the expensive glass. I can't accept that." Keanu shrugged. "Why not?" "I can afford it." His gaze remained steady. "And I want you to have it." Victor swallowed hard. He had spent his entire career catering to the wealthy, serving drinks to people who barely acknowledged his presence. And now here was one of the most famous men in the world, treating him with more kindness than any of them ever had. Keanu's voice softened. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I've met a lot of people in my life. Some rich, some poor. And you know what? The ones with the most money aren't always the ones with the most kindness." Victor's throat tightened. Keanu continued, his tone even. "I came here tonight because I wanted to see how people like you treat someone who doesn't fit your image of success. And now I know." Elena looked down, shame creeping up her spine. Michael cleared his throat and took a step forward. "Keanu," he said, his voice careful, "I assure you this isn't how I want my staff to behave. I will personally make sure changes are made." Keanu studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I hope so." The room was silent. Nobody moved. Then Keanu stood up, pulling a small bundle of cash from his pocket and placing it on the counter. "That's for the drink," he said, And a little extra. His eyes flickered toward Victor. Maybe you can use it to make this place a little more welcoming. Victor and Elena stared at the money, the weight of their mistake settling deep into their bones. Keanu turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, he glanced back at Max, the doorman. Next time, Keanu said, don't judge a man by his shoes. Max nodded quickly, his face burning with embarrassment, and with that, Keanu Reeves walked out of the Velvet Lounge. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Victor looked down at the untouched $20,000 drink in front of him. His hands shook slightly as he exhaled. Elena rubbed her arms, whispering, "We screwed up." Michael nodded, jaw tight. Yes, you did. And in that moment, they all knew. This wasn't just a bad night. This was a lesson they would never forget. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the Velvet Lounge was different. The usual sense of exclusivity had been replaced by something heavier. Guilt. The staff moved about quietly, their minds replaying the events of the previous night. Victor hadn't touched the $20,000 drink. It still sat on the bar, untouched, like a monument to their mistake. Michael Carter, the owner, gathered his staff for a private meeting. He stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Elena, Victor, and Max sat in silence, waiting. Finally, Michael spoke. "Let's be honest," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We messed up." No one argued. Michael turned to Elena first. "You turned Keanu away without even asking who he was. Why?" Elena swallowed hard. I thought he was just some random guy who didn't belong here." Michael nodded, then turned to Victor. "And you?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing what I thought was best for the lounge. We have an image to maintain." Michael let out a sharp breath. "And what image is that? One that treats people like dirt if they don't look rich enough?" Victor looked down, ashamed. Michael's voice hardened. "You both humiliated a man, a good man. And the worst part? You wouldn't have cared if he wasn't famous." Elena and Victor winced at the truth of his words. Max, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I just followed orders, but I should have known better," Michael nodded. "And now we have to deal with the consequences." He turned to his assistant, Nora, who had been watching from the corner. "How bad is it?" Nora glanced at her phone, scrolling through articles. "The story is everywhere. Someone must have recognized Keanu and posted what happened online." Michael rubbed his temples. "Great, just great," Nora continued. "People are calling the lounge the most pretentious bar in the city. Our reviews are tanking. Social media is eating us alive." Victor ran a hand through his hair. "This is bad." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now you care?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" Michael straightened, his tone firm. "We own up to it, publicly." Victor's eyes widened. "You want us to admit what we did?" Michael nodded. "Yes, we need to apologize, not just to Keanu, but to everyone we've ever treated unfairly." The room fell silent. Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll do it." Michael's gaze softened slightly. "Good, because if we don't fix this, the Velvet Lounge won't survive." Victor exhaled. "Yeah, we deserve this." Michael nodded. "Yes, you do." Later that day, the Velvet Lounge released a public statement. "Last night, we made a terrible mistake. We judged someone unfairly, and we deeply regret it. Keanu Reeves deserved better, and so does every person who walks through our doors. Moving forward, we promise to change how we treat our guests. Everyone is welcome here. No exceptions." The post went viral within minutes. The reactions were mixed. Some people appreciated the honesty, while others weren't so forgiving. Victor sat behind the bar reading the comments. "Too late. You showed your true colors." At least they apologized. Most places wouldn't. Will Keanu forgive them, though? That last comment made Victor's stomach turn, because honestly, he wasn't sure.